Alright, now that you have some practice from the first two examples of figuring out the music, I'm going to go even faster on this one and start to approach what I might actually do when I'm looking at a piece like this. So the first thing to do, as always, is figure out the rhythm. The process is going to stay the same, it's just how fast we do it is what changes. So always rhythm, notes, and style. So looking at the rhythm, I see that it's in 3/4, so I know we're going to be counting to 3 each measure. I'm not actually even going to write in the counts for every measure because I can see this is just 3/4 notes. That's easy to count. Same thing, easy. Just some eighth notes, easy. This measure looks a little tricky, so this one I'm going to need to figure out the counting. My rule with all of my students with rhythms is if you can just look at it and clap and count it, then you don't need to write in the rhythms. But if you're unsure, then you should write in the rhythms and you should practice it. So I'm a little less sure about this one. So let's try to look through this. So first I see a eighth rest with a dot and then a 16th note. So that rhythm looks a little bit tricky and I'm not really sure how that's going to work just yet. So instead of trying to spend a lot of time figuring this out, I'm actually going to work from the end of the measure instead and see if I can figure it out more easily and sort of narrow down my options. So I know that there's 3/4 notes in the measure, so I need to look for those 3/4 notes. So if I start at the end of the measure, here we have a quarter note. So because there's nothing after this quarter note before the end of the measure, I know that this quarter note has to be the 3rd quarter note, has to be on beat 3. And then going back from there, we have another quarter note. This one's on beat 2. So that actually makes it really easy. I know that this quarter note's on 2, this quarter note's on 3. So I know that all of this has to be within beat 1. Now, it's still not totally clear how beat 1 is being split up and organized, but I can keep working backwards and actually deduce what is happening. So this is a 16th note. There's nothing between this 16th note and the quarter note on beat 2. So I know that 16th notes are 1 E and then it goes on to the next number. So I know that this is the of beat 1 that happens right before 2. If we were counting all 16th notes, 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, I know we'd have 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a. So I know that this comes right before 2 as a 16th note. Then I also know if this is the last 16th note, then this dotted 8th note must be taking up the first 3 16th notes. Also, if you know how dotted notes work, then that makes sense. Dotted notes, the best way to think about them is that they're 3 halves. So if this is an 8th note that's dotted, it means that it's 3 halves of an 8th note. So first of all, what's half of an 8th note? A 16th note, exactly. So if this is 3 halves, then it's 3 half of an 8th note, 16th notes. So 1 E and is the 3 16th notes of the dotted 8th rests, which again means that this 16th note lands on the So we sort of double checked working backwards, it makes sense. Working forwards, it makes sense. So I'm very confident now that this is on the of beat 1 leading to beat 2. Now continuing to look through the rhythms, 3/4 notes easy. This rhythm looks a little tricky again, but if you realize that this dotted 8th note is the same as the dotted 8th rest, but now instead of a rest, it's a note. Now we know this is 1, 2, 3. Not too bad. This measure is the same. This measure is the same. 3/4 notes easy. All 8th notes easy. Oh, dotted quarter notes. This one maybe is a little bit tricky. So we have our quarter note with a dot. So what do we do when we find a dot? What does that mean? 3 halves. Remember that. A dot means 3 halves. So what's half of a quarter note? An 8th note, exactly. So we have our half times 3. So that means that this dotted quarter note is going to take up 1 8th note on 1, 2nd 8th note on the and of 1, and the 3rd 8th note on 2. So this is sustaining through 1 and 2, which means that this next dotted quarter note must start on the and of 2, and it takes up the and of 2, 3, and the and of 3, sustaining through those. So we have our 3/8 notes, 1, 3/8 notes on the and of 2, and that fills up our whole measure of 3/4. And then finally we have a dotted half note in the end, which now you're probably already an expert. Dotted note means 3 halves. Half of a half note is a quarter note. So this is 3/4 notes long. The other way we can figure that out is that's the only note in the measure. So that must be a whole measure long, which is 3/4 notes in this case because we're in 3/4. So that's the rhythms. Now, thinking about notes, the first place to check is our key signature. So we have a sharp on the F line, a sharp on the C space. So every F and every C in the piece is going to be sharp. Now we can start looking through and actually figuring out the names of these notes. Looking at the first one already is kind of tricky. So same thing with the rhythm. I would just sort of glance through this and see if there's any tricky spots that I'm not sure about. And in fact, the very first one is a little tricky here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is figure out what that note is. And you can use your same skills of counting through the musical alphabet to figure it out. So we're in our G clef. We start on the G line. You go backwards 1 note to F, backwards 1 note to E. This space here is back to D. This line is back to C sharp. Even though it's not in the same octave, it's not the same space, it's still a C, so it's still a C sharp. So C sharp, back 1 letter to B, back 1 letter on the line to A, back 1 letter to, what comes before A? If you said G, you're correct. Remember, the musical alphabet has that cycle, so when we get to A, we just go back 1 to G in this case, and then back another 1 to F. So that note is an F. But is there anything that I missed? It seems like an F. We counted it backwards to F, but is F the fully correct answer here? No, it's not. We need the sharp. Because again, we have an F sharp up here, so that means all of the Fs are sharp, no matter where they land. If it's the note F, then it's a sharp, unless it was canceled out by a natural sign, or it could even be canceled out, or it could be even canceled out by a flat sign, but there's no natural or flat there, so it's an F sharp because F sharp is in the key signature. So good job if you noticed that that should be F sharp. Now looking through, I know that this is D. We have our F sharp again, D's again, F sharps, D's again, another D. Now we have a big leap up. This one, you might have to count it up. You could count all the way down here from the G line, but that would take a little while. Totally doable and is okay. Or you could use a shortcut. We talked about this being F sharp, so we know that this top line is F. So from there we can count up 1 space forwards through the alphabet G, 1 space forwards through the musical alphabet, so not to H in the normal alphabet, but back around to A in the musical alphabet. So that note is an A, and then down a step to G, and then we have our F sharp. In your music, it is okay to draw in little reminder accidentals to know that the key signature is there and remember, especially when it's a really far away note like this. I actually might draw a sharp in there just as a reminder that that's an F sharp, not an F natural. So we have our F sharp again, D, F sharp D. We already know that this is A, G, same thing D, A, G, same thing D, A, G, working down our scale with an F sharp, E, D, repeated Ds. This low note you might have to count down to and figure it out. It's okay also to write in some note names like this. If it's notes that you're not super familiar with, that can be a good reminder. So this is an A, we leap up to E and D. And that's the notes. Now the next step and final step for figuring out the music is the style. So with the style, we want to think about the tempo, which there's no tempo marking, so we'll have to really think about that. Our dynamics, our articulations, and I think the title of the piece can often be helpful for style too, depending on what the title is, of course. So for this one, let's take a look through those things. So let's start with the title and get an idea of the overall character, and then maybe that can help us build in some ideas for the dynamics and articulation and other style things. So Leaping Waltz. If you know what a waltz is a dance with an emphasis on beat 1, and it's always in 3. So we have an emphasis on 1, and then 2, 3 sort of leads back to 1. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. There's lots of famous waltzes that you may have heard before, and they all have that 1, 2, 3. And we can see, looking at this, that kind of explains what this articulation is. This line is a tenuto, meaning a long, sustained note, and then we have our 2 staccatos. Long, short, short, long, short, short, and that's giving us our waltz feel. So that explains the articulation and helps us to know that on all of the measures, we're probably going to want a little weight on beat 1, and then moving through beats 2 and 3. Now, the leaping part sort of talks about this big leaps here, so that might give us some ideas about tempo. When we have big leaps, we want to have enough time to really be able to hear them in the music, and also time to play them, of course, if we're actually playing it. So we probably don't want to go too fast. So we could say maybe like moderato, comfortable, not too crazy fast. I think in general it's a good idea to not go too crazy fast. Probably just in life in general, but definitely in music, you always want to be comfortable and in control. So that's going to be our tempo. Then dynamics, we have this piano here, and that's all the information we have. Now again, it would be really boring to just play this piano the whole entire time. So let's think of some ideas we can do to give it a little bit more character and more excitement. So we already know this waltz feel is going to mean a little bit more emphasis on 1. So probably every measure has a little bit of this effect to it, and maybe even a little crescendo back to 1. But obviously we wouldn't want to write all of that in because that's really confusing and there's so much information there. So we can kind of leave that as implied, that this music is a waltz, so we have that boom, bum, bum, boom, bum, bum. So that's what we're going to do for general dynamics on each measure. But I think we could come up with some more macro or big picture dynamics as well. You notice we have a lot of this D-A-G, 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 D-A-G. That comes up a lot over and over. In music, when we have repetitions like this, especially when it's back to back, we often don't want to just play it stagnantly. Even this measure of the repeated D, 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 we don't want that to be just steady either because it gets boring. We already heard those notes and rhythms, so let's do something different to make it more interesting and more exciting. So maybe let's say we'll have a big crescendo through these. And I think that makes sense because then we have the scale coming down, so that is an opportunity to do another diminuendo. And then we don't want to be stagnant here, so let's try crescendoing. And then maybe we can diminuendo into the end of the piece so we can at least end piano again, like where we were supposed to start. So I think that is a good enough dynamic plan for us. We're going to sort of do our micro dynamics of the strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, weak here, and then crescendo, decrescendo, crescendo, diminuendo, and then we're done. So that's a quicker overview of rhythm, notes, and style for this, but I think we're ready to try putting it together. So let's try counting through it. If you've been practicing your subdivisions exercises, if you took your time through the previous 2 examples, then I think you have a good chance of being able to sing and count through this one with me. But again, it's okay to pause it, go slower, do what you need to figure it out. You could even try writing out the counts maybe on a separate piece of paper, or just taking more time to think through the counts, whatever you need to do. But let's try it. One other note for the singing, this D to A is a really big leap. This is what it sounds like on the clarinet. Singing that, I can't sing that high. So I'm just going to sing a lower A instead, and that's okay. It's more about getting the general shape of low, high, down, low, high, down. It doesn't have to be exactly this distance of a leap. So let's try singing through this one with all the right rhythm counting and musicality. So let's set our steady beat, and let's try it. 1, ready, go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3. A 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, a 2, 3. A 2, 3. A 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 1. And that's how that goes. Let me demonstrate it on the clarinet so you can hear it with actually the right octaves and all the right notes, and see how close we were. 1, ready. And that's that one. And congratulations for working through all of these musical examples. If you felt really comfortable figuring this one out and getting it down, then you're going to feel really comfortable figuring out pretty much any music that you encounter. So great job working through these. If this wasn't super easy, that's okay. This was very advanced, and this is pretty close to how I actually look at my music and play it as a professional musician. So if you're feeling comfortable with this, then you're in really good shape knowing how to read your music. If this wasn't comfortable, feel free to go back to the first and second demonstration videos to sort of get more in depth and a slower walkthrough of things. But this is great if you were able to keep up with this. If you weren't, it's okay as well. You can just keep practicing, keep doing that subdivision exercise that we talked about in the main module of this, explaining all of those things. But hopefully this shows you how rhythm, notes, and style come together to make whatever music you need to play. Thanks so much for watching this little course that I put together. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you know how to read music, and I can't wait to hear the music you're gonna make.